David Reed was checking fuel lines in the engine room when he heard the noise. A soft scratching sound came from somewhere deep in the cargo hold. His freighter, the Wandering Star, was 3 days out from Port Ceres and heading toward Trinity Station with a load of mining equipment. The ship was old and made plenty of strange sounds, but this was different. This sounded like something alive. He grabbed his plasma cutter from the tool rack and moved through the narrow corridors. The cargo hold was dark except for the emergency lighting strips along the floor. David knew every inch of his ship, had owned her for 5 years now, and nothing should be making that sound. The scratching came again, louder this time, behind the supply crates in the far corner. David approached slowly, weapon ready. Pirates were rare out here in the frontier routes, but desperate people did desperate things. He'd found stowaways before, usually workers trying to escape bad contracts on mining stations. What he found made him lower his weapon in shock. 3 small creatures were huddled between the crates and the hull wall. They had scales that caught the dim light, shimmering red and gold. Wings, thin and torn, were pressed tight against their backs. Their bodies were so thin he could see the outline of their ribs. Large eyes filled with intelligence and fear stared back at him. Dragons, real dragons. The Ashir, the species humanity had discovered 2 years ago on a world at the edge of explored space. David had seen them on the news broadcasts, had watched the complicated first contact negotiations, but he had never expected to find 3 of them hiding on his ship. The largest one, her scales a deep burgundy color, moved in front of the other 2. She tried to look threatening but was too weak to do much more than sway on her feet. The middle one had golden scales that seemed to glow even in the low light. The smallest had bright red scales like rubies and eyes that were an unusual violet color. David raised his hand slowly. The creatures watched every movement. They understood this was a peaceful gesture. Good. That meant they had been around humans before. Easy there, he said quietly. I'm not going to hurt you. The smallest one made a soft whimpering sound. The burgundy one shot her a sharp look, but it was too late. David could see they were starving. How long had they been on his ship? He tried to remember the last time he had been deep in the cargo hold. Maybe a week? They must have come aboard at Port Ceres when he was loading supplies. You're hungry, David said. It wasn't a question. Stay here. I'll bring food. He backed away slowly and headed to the galley. His mind was racing. Dragons were protected under the new treaty laws. Having them on his ship without proper documentation could land him in prison for years. But looking at those 3 terrified younglings, he couldn't just throw them off at the nearest station. They would be separated, questioned, maybe sent back to wherever they came from. Something told him that would be very bad for them. David pulled protein bars from the storage locker, grabbed dried fruit packets, and filled a large container with water. When he returned to the cargo hold, the 3 dragons were exactly where he had left them. They watched him set down the food and water, then back away to the entrance. It's yours, he said. Go ahead. They waited until he was far enough away. Then they moved. The way they ate told David everything. These were not creatures who had missed one meal. They had been starving for days, maybe longer. They drank the entire container of water and ate every scrap of food he had brought. When they finished, the smallest one looked directly at him. Her violet eyes held an intelligence that made David's breath catch. This was not an animal. This was a person young and scared and far from home. You understand me, don't you? David asked. The burgundy one, the leader, gave a single slow nod. David sat down on a crate and rubbed his face. All right then. I'm David. This is my ship, and we have a problem. Over the next 2 days, David worked out a system with them. They understood standard language even if they couldn't speak it. He asked yes or no questions, and they nodded or shook their heads. The story came together piece by piece. They were from Ashir, the dragon homeworld. They had run away. Something about their family made the burgundy one's scales darken with fear. They had stowed away on one ship, then another, then somehow ended up in his cargo bay. David started calling them by simple names. Ruby for the burgundy leader, Amber for the golden middle sister, and Violet for the smallest one with those striking eyes. They seemed to understand these were names and responded to them. Ruby stayed cautious, always watching him with calculating eyes. Amber was curious about everything, creeping closer each day to examine his tools and equipment. Violet had decided David was safe almost immediately. She made a soft chirping sound when she saw him, and leaned into his hand when he scratched between her small horns. "You three are going to get me arrested," David told them on the third day. Violet purred like a cat, a vibration that made him smile despite everything. His ship was 5 days out from Trinity Station now. The station had heavy security, immigration checkpoints, and sensors that would detect 3 unauthorized life forms in seconds. David had no plan. He just knew he couldn't let these younglings be taken and separated. They had already run from something terrible. He wouldn't be the one to send them back to it. What David didn't know was that his arrival at Trinity Station was being anticipated by others. His reputation as a quiet pilot who asked no questions had reached certain people. And in the shadows of the station, something dangerous was waiting for exactly the right opportunity. Trinity Station grew larger in the viewport as the wandering star approached. David had spent the last day trying to figure out how to smuggle 3 dragons past security. Every plan he came up with had a dozen ways to fail. The station scanners would pick up their heat signatures. The cargo inspection would find them. Even if he somehow got past the docking checks, where would they hide on a station where security cameras watched every corridor? Ruby seemed to sense his worry. She had started staying closer to him, watching his face as he worked through ideas and dismissed them. Amber and Violet picked up on their sister's tension. The cargo hold felt heavy with unspoken fear. "I'll figure something out," David promised them. He wished he believed it. The communication panel blinked. David accepted the incoming message. A bored voice came through. "Freighter Wandering Star, this is Trinity Station Control. Transmit your cargo manifest and prepare for standard inspection upon docking." "Copy that, Control," David replied. Transmitting manifest now. He sent the file and tried to keep his voice steady. This was routine. He had docked at Trinity Station dozens of times. There was no reason for them to suspect anything, except his fuel consumption was off, which meant the logs would show something wasn't right. Except 3 illegal passengers were hiding in his cargo hold. Except he was about to commit a serious crime by not declaring them. David had never been good at lying. He had left the merchant fleet because he couldn't stomach the corruption, the deals made in dark corners, the looking away when convenient. Now here he was, about to lie to station security to protect 3 refugee younglings. He looked at Ruby, Amber, and Violet. They were children. Scared children who had run from something bad enough to risk stowing away on random ships with no food or water. Whatever waited for them back home was worse than starving in the dark. "All right," he said to them. "Here's what we're going to do." David explained his plan. It wasn't good, but it was all he had. The cargo hold had a maintenance shaft that led to the water recycling system. The space was tight, dark, and uncomfortable, but it didn't register on standard life sign scanners because of all the machinery interference. The 3 sisters would hide there during the inspection. It would only be for an hour or 2 at most. Ruby listened carefully to every word. When he finished, she looked at her sisters, then back at him. She nodded once. They would trust him. Getting them into the maintenance shaft was harder than David expected. Amber's wings kept catching on the edges. Violet was small enough to slip through easily, but didn't want to leave David's side. Ruby went last, giving him one long look before disappearing into the darkness. David sealed the access panel and tried to make the area look undisturbed. The docking procedure went smoothly. Too smoothly. David felt his stomach tighten as the station's docking clamps locked onto his ship. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't say what. 2 security officers came aboard for the standard inspection. They were professional and efficient, checking the cargo manifest against what was actually in the hold. David stayed calm, answered their questions, and tried not to think about 3 dragons hiding 20 meters away. "Fuel consumption is high," one officer noted, checking his datapad. "You running an efficiency problem?" "Old ship," David said with a shrug. "Probably need to replace the injectors." "Been meaning to get it done." The officer nodded. It was a reasonable explanation. They finished their inspection and prepared to leave. David started to relax. Then the second officer stopped. "Wait, there's a heat anomaly in the recycling system area." David's blood went cold. "That system runs hot. Always has." "Maybe." The officer moved toward the maintenance shaft. "But regulations say we check any anomalies." "Open it up." David didn't move. His mind raced through options. He could refuse, but that would make them suspicious. He could try to fight, but there were 2 of them and station security was 30 seconds away. He could run, but where would he go? The officer's hand moved to his weapon. "Sir, I need you to open that panel. Now." Before David could respond, an alarm shrieked through the station's communication system. Red emergency lights started flashing in the docking bay. The officer's radio crackled with urgent voices. All security to level 3. We have a breach. Repeat containment breach on level 3. The two officers looked at each other. The first one spoke into his radio. This is Unit 7 at Dock 12. Responding to breach alert. They ran from David's ship without another word. The docking bay erupted into chaos as more security personnel rushed past. David stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe his luck. Then he moved fast, opening the maintenance shaft. Out now, he called. We need to move while everyone's distracted. Ruby emerged first, followed by Amber and Violet. They looked shaken but unharmed. David led them quickly through the cargo hold to a secondary storage area he had prepared. It had blankets, food, water, and most importantly, no camera coverage. It was the best he could do. Stay here and stay quiet, he told them. I'm going to find out what's happening and see if I can get us out of here. Ruby caught his arm with one claw, gentle but firm. Her eyes asked a clear question. Was he coming back? I promise, David said. I won't leave you. He sealed the storage area and headed into the station. The corridors were full of panicked people and rushing security teams. David grabbed a passing technician. What's going on? He asked. Prisoner escape, the technician said breathlessly. 3 of them. Dangerous ones. They're telling everyone to stay in their ships or quarters until it's contained. David felt ice run down his spine. 3 prisoners. The same day he arrived with 3 dragon refugees. That couldn't be coincidence. He thought about the inspection that had almost found Ruby, Amber, and Violet. The officer who had noticed the heat anomaly right before the alarm. This wasn't random. Someone knew about the dragons. Someone had arranged that escape as a distraction, which meant someone had been watching him, tracking him, waiting for him to arrive at Trinity Station. David turned and ran back toward his ship. He had to get the sisters off the station before whoever was hunting them made their next move. But when he reached his docking bay, he found his path blocked. A woman stood between him and his ship. She was tall, dressed in expensive clothes that marked her as wealthy, and she was smiling. But her eyes were cold as empty space. David Reed, she said. We need to talk about your cargo. Behind her, 3 large men stepped out of the shadows. They all carried weapons. None of them looked like station security. David's hand moved toward his plasma cutter, but the woman shook her head. I wouldn't, she said. My associates are very fast and very good at their jobs. Now you're going to take me to those 3 young Asher you've been hiding, and you're going to do it quietly, because if you don't, I'll have your ship torn apart piece by piece until I find them myself. Do we understand each other? David looked at the weapons pointed at him. He looked at his ship, where 3 scared younglings were hiding and trusting him to protect them. He thought about his promise to Ruby that he would come back. Yeah, he said quietly. We understand each other. The woman's smile widened. Excellent. Lead the way. David walked slowly toward his ship with the woman and her 3 armed men following close behind. His mind worked frantically, searching for any way out of this situation. The docking bay was still chaotic with security running past, but none of them looked twice at the group. The woman had timed this perfectly, using the prisoner escape as cover. You're wondering how I knew, the woman said conversationally as they walked, about your passengers. It's actually quite simple. We've had people watching the Asher homeworld for months. 3 royal younglings disappeared. Very valuable younglings. Their families would pay anything to have them returned. Royal. That explained why Ruby was so protective, so careful. They weren't just refugees. They were royalty running from something. You're a bounty hunter, David said. The woman laughed. Such an ugly term. I prefer specialist. I locate rare and valuable items. The Ashir are new to the galactic community. Their internal politics are complicated. Civil wars, family disputes, the usual mess. These 3 girls are worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. They reached the ship's entrance. David's hand hovered over the access panel. Once he opened that door, he would be leading these people straight to Ruby, Amber, and Violet. He would be breaking his promise. But if he refused, they would tear the ship apart anyway and probably kill him in the process. The door, please, the woman said. One of her men pressed a weapon against David's back to emphasize the point. David opened the door. They stepped inside the Wandering Star. The corridor was quiet. Too quiet. David had expected to hear some sound from the storage area where he'd left the sisters. Nothing. Where are they? The woman asked. Her pleasant tone had an edge now. Storage compartment. This way. David led them through the ship. Each step felt like betrayal. He remembered Violet's trusting eyes, Amber's curiosity, Ruby's careful nod when she'd agreed to hide. They had trusted him. He had promised to protect them. They reached the storage compartment. David hesitated at the sealed door. Open it, the woman ordered. David entered his access code. The door slid open. The storage compartment was empty. The blankets were still there. The food and water containers sat undisturbed. But the 3 dragon sisters were gone. The woman's face went cold with fury. Where are they? I don't know, David said, and for once he was telling the complete truth. He had no idea how they'd escaped or where they'd gone. The compartment had no other exits. They should have been trapped. One of the armed men grabbed David by his jacket and slammed him against the wall. You're lying! I'm not. They were here when I left them. The woman held up a hand. Her man released David but kept his weapon trained on him. She walked slowly around the compartment, examining everything. Her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She stopped at the air vent. Clever, she said. Very clever. They went through the ventilation system. She looked at David. Did you teach them that? No, I didn't even know they could fit. It was true. The vents were narrow, designed only for airflow. But the sisters were small and thin from starvation. If they squeezed hard enough, moved carefully enough, they might just fit. Ruby must have figured it out. She'd been watching David work on the ship, learning the layout, planning escape routes. She had never fully trusted him after all. Smart girl. The woman pulled out a small device from her pocket. She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared, showing the ship's ventilation layout. They can't have gotten far. The vents all lead to central air processing. We'll flush them out. Wait, David said. You're going to flood the vents? That could kill them. Not flood. We have something better. The woman nodded to one of her men. He pulled out a canister from his pack. Sedative gas. Harmless but very effective. They'll fall asleep within seconds. Then we collect them and everyone goes home happy. David felt sick. He watched as the man connected the canister to the ventilation input. In minutes, the gas would spread through the entire system. Ruby, Amber, and Violet would have nowhere to go. They would breathe it in and collapse. These people would take them, probably back to whatever they'd been running from. This is wrong, David said. They're children. They're scared. They're property, the woman corrected. Very expensive property. And you've made this much harder than it needed to be. She looked at him thoughtfully. You know, I could report you to station security. Smuggling protected species is a serious crime. You'd spend the next decade in prison, or you could walk away right now. Forget this ever happened, and I'll make sure your involvement is never mentioned. Your choice. David looked at the canister being attached to his ship's ventilation system. He looked at the woman's cold eyes. He thought about Ruby, Amber, and Violet somewhere in the vents. Probably terrified, probably hearing everything through the thin metal walls. He'd been a good person his whole life. Followed the rules, did the right thing, never caused trouble. Where had it gotten him? Alone on an old freighter, barely making enough to keep flying, no family, no real friends. He'd left the merchant fleet because he couldn't stomach the corruption, but all he'd really done was make himself irrelevant. These 3 younglings had looked at him with trust. They'd eaten food from his hand. Violet had purred when he scratched her horns. Ruby had nodded when he promised to come back. David made his choice. He grabbed the plasma cutter from his belt and sliced through the canister's connection before anyone could stop him. The gas hissed out harmlessly into the cargo hold. The woman's men raised their weapons, but she held up her hand again. Interesting, she said. You're choosing prison over profit. That's remarkably stupid. Yeah, well, David said. I've been called worse. Kill him. The men raised their weapons. David closed his eyes. At least he'd kept his promise. At least Ruby would know he'd tried. The lights went out. The ship's emergency lighting didn't come on. The entire wandering star went completely dark. David heard confused shouts, the sound of people stumbling. Then he heard something else. A low, thrumming sound that made the air vibrate. A sound he'd heard before when Violet purred, but deeper, stronger, harmonizing in 3-part resonance. The dragons were singing. Fire erupted in the darkness. Not wild flames, but controlled streams of light and heat. David saw them illuminated in their own fire glow. Ruby, Amber, and Violet standing together at the far end of the corridor. They'd grown. No, not grown. They'd been hiding their true size, making themselves smaller to seem less threatening. Now they stood tall, wings spread wide, eyes glowing like molten metal. Ruby roared. It wasn't a scared youngster's cry. It was the sound of an apex predator defending her family. The woman's men fired their weapons. The energy bolts hit the dragon's scales and deflected harmlessly away. Asher's scales were tough, David remembered from the news reports. Resistant to energy weapons. These men had brought the wrong tools. The dragons moved forward together. Amber released a blast of superheated air that sent one man flying backward. Violet, small but fierce, latched onto another man's weapon and tore it from his hands with surprising strength. Ruby focused on the woman, backing her toward the cargo hold. "Call them off," the woman screamed at David. "Call them off or I'll have you hunted down." "They're not mine to command," David said quietly. "You made a mistake. You thought they were property, their people, and you threatened their family." Ruby drove the woman and her remaining men back through the cargo hold to the airlock. She didn't hurt them, David noticed. She could have burned them, could have torn them apart with her claws. Instead, she just pushed them out, forcing them off the ship. The moment they were through, Amber sealed the airlock behind them. The emergency lights flickered back on. The three sisters turned to look at David. They were breathing hard, their scales still glowing slightly from the heat of their fire. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Violet chirped and bounded over to David, pressing her head against his chest. Amber followed more slowly, her golden eyes questioning. Ruby approached last, stopping right in front of him. She extended one claw and placed it carefully over his heart. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, not the cautious nod of cooperation. This was acknowledgement, respect, trust earned, not given. David let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "We need to leave now before they come back with security." Ruby nodded again. She understood. They all moved quickly, David rushing to the bridge while the sisters secured the cargo hold. He started the undocking sequence, overriding the safety protocols. Alarms blared. Station control shouted angry messages. David ignored everything and fired the engines. The wandering star tore away from Trinity Station, leaving chaos behind. David set course for the outer systems anywhere far from here. He'd figure out the details later. Right now, he just needed distance. Ruby, Amber, and Violet came to the bridge. They sat down around him, no longer hiding. Violet leaned against his chair. Amber examined the control panels with curious eyes. Ruby watched the stars ahead, her expression unreadable. "So," David said, "anyone want to tell me where we're actually going?" Ruby looked at him. Then she did something that made David's eyes widen. She spoke. "Home," she said in heavily accented but clear standard, "but not our old home. We need to find a new one." The wandering star jumped into hyperspace 3 hours after leaving Trinity Station. David had pushed the old engines harder than he should have, but distance mattered more than caution right now. Once they were safely in the stream between stars, he finally allowed himself to breathe. Ruby's revelation that she could speak standard had opened up real conversation. Over the next several hours, the sisters told their story properly. Not in gestures and nods, but in words. They were daughters of House Crimson, one of the ruling families on Ashir. Their mother had been killed in what was officially called an accident, but was actually assassination. Their father had remarried quickly, taking a woman from House Gold who brought her own children into the family. The new mother had been kind at first. Then she'd started talking about how the old bloodline needed to end, how only her children should inherit. "She poisoned our food," Amber said quietly. Her golden scales seemed dimmer as she spoke. "Small amounts. Not enough to kill quickly, just enough to make us weak and sick. Father thought we had a disease. He kept us locked in our rooms for treatment." "Ruby figured it out," Violet added, pressing close to her eldest sister. "She tasted the medicine they gave us. Recognized the poison. We ran," Ruby said simply. "Took what we could carry and escaped to the spaceport. Found a cargo ship heading off-world and hid inside. We've been running for 2 months. 2 months of stowing away on ships, stealing food when they could, hiding in cargo holds and ventilation shafts. 2 months of being hunted by bounty hunters hired by their stepmother." David felt anger burn in his chest at the thought of what these younglings had endured. "The woman at the station," David said. "She mentioned your families would pay to get you back." "She meant your stepmother," Ruby nodded. She wants us dead, but she needs it to look like an accident. If we die mysteriously, there would be questions. But if we die trying to run away, lost in space somewhere, that's tragic but believable. So we can't go back to Asher, David said. Where can you go? Do you have other family? Mother's sister lives on a colony world, Ruby said. New Perth, it's at the edge of human space. She left Asher politics years ago. We were trying to reach her, but we never had enough money for proper transport. That's why we kept stowing away. David pulled up the navigation charts. New Perth was far. Really far. It would take weeks to get there, and they'd have to pass through several checkpoints. His ship was now flagged by Trinity Station security for illegal departure. Every official route would be watching for him. I can get you there, David said, but it won't be easy. We'll need to take the long way around, avoid the main shipping lanes, and we'll need supplies. We have something, Violet said. She disappeared into the cargo hold and returned carrying a small pouch. She opened it carefully. Inside were precious gems, the kind used in high-end electronics. Worth a small fortune. We took these from our family vault. For emergencies. David looked at the gems, then at the three sisters. They were offering him payment. More money than he'd make in years of hauling cargo, but taking it felt wrong somehow. Keep it, he said. You'll need it when you reach New Perth, for starting over. Ruby studied him. Why are you helping us? It was a fair question. David had risked his freedom, his ship, maybe his life for three strangers. He wasn't sure he had a good answer. Because you needed help, he said finally, and because someone should. They made it 4 days before the pursuit caught up. David was plotting their next jump when the proximity alarm shrieked. A ship had dropped out of hyperspace directly behind them, then another. Then 3 more. 5 vessels, all faster and better armed than the Wandering Star. David? Violet asked, her voice small and scared. He checked the sensors. The lead ship was broadcasting a signal. David accepted it. A face appeared on the screen. A man in his 50s with hard eyes and expensive combat armor. Freighter Wandering Star, cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. You're harboring stolen property belonging to House Crimson. Surrender the fugitives and you'll be allowed to leave. Resist and we'll disable your ship and take them anyway. David looked at Ruby. She had gone very still, her scales darkening almost to black. She recognized the man on the screen. Silas, she whispered. Our stepmother's head of security. She sent her best hunter. David turned back to the screen. The people on my ship aren't property. They're children running from someone who tried to poison them. I'm not handing them over. Silas smiled without humor. Your ship is barely holding together. You have no weapons. We have 5 warships. This isn't a negotiation. Power down now or we open fire. The connection cut off. David's hands flew across the controls. The Wandering Star was old and slow, but he'd owned her for 5 years. He knew every trick she had. Everybody hold on, he said. This is going to get rough. He fired the engines at full burn and dove toward the nearby asteroid field. The pursuit ships followed immediately. Energy bolts flashed past the viewport. One grazed the rear shields, making the whole ship shudder. Can we fight them? Amber asked. We don't have weapons, David said through gritted teeth. But asteroids do. He pushed the Wandering Star deep into the field, weaving between massive rocks. The pursuit ships were faster but less maneuverable. David used every bit of skill he'd learned in his merchant fleet days, pushing the old freighter through gaps that seemed too narrow, using the asteroids as cover. Another bolt hit the shields. Warnings flashed across the console. His rear shield generator was failing. One more good hit and they'd start taking damage to the hull. Ruby moved to stand behind his chair, her claws gripping the back. There, she said, pointing to a massive asteroid ahead. That one has caves. Sensors can't penetrate the rock. If we can get inside before they see us. David saw what she meant. It was crazy. The opening was barely large enough for his ship. If he miscalculated by even a meter, they'd crash. But it was their only chance. Hold tight, he said, and aimed straight for the cave. The Wandering Star shot through the opening with meters to spare. David immediately cut all non-essential systems. The ship went dark and silent. Through the viewport, they watched the pursuit ships pass by, searching. Minutes ticked past. The ship circled the asteroid field but didn't approach the cave. They can't see us, Violet breathed. Not yet, David said. But they know we're here somewhere. They'll search every asteroid if they have to. We bought time, not escape. Ruby was thinking. He could see it in her eyes. She looked at her sisters, then at David. There might be another way, she said slowly, but it's dangerous, and it means trusting us completely. I already trust you, David said. What's your plan? Ruby explained. Ashir had abilities beyond their fire, ancient abilities that most didn't know about. They could create something like a shield, a field of energy that bent light and sensors around it. With all three sisters working together, they might be able to hide the entire ship for long enough to slip past the search pattern. But we've never done it with something this big, Amber warned. It takes all our concentration. And if we mess up, they'll see us immediately. And we'll be helpless while we do it, Ruby added. We won't be able to move or defend ourselves. You'll have to fly the ship and protect us at the same time. David looked at the three sisters. They'd already saved him once at Trinity Station. Now they were offering to make themselves completely vulnerable to save him again. All right, he said. Tell me what you need. The sisters positioned themselves around the small bridge. They began to hum that same three-part harmony David had heard before. But this time it was different, softer. The air around them started to shimmer. David felt the hair on his arms stand up from the energy. The shimmer spread, covering the walls, flowing over the controls. David watched his sensors as the ship's signature began to fade. It was working. The wandering star was disappearing. Now, Ruby said, her voice strained. Go now while we can hold it. David powered up the engines as quietly as possible. He guided the ship out of the cave and into the asteroid field. The pursuit ships were hundreds of kilometers away now, searching the far side of the field. David moved slowly, carefully, keeping asteroids between him and the hunters. Sweat ran down Ruby's face. Amber's scales had lost their glow. Violet was shaking with effort. David pushed the guilt aside and focused on flying. They were trusting him with their lives. He wouldn't waste that trust. They cleared the asteroid field. The pursuit ships were still searching behind them. David waited until they were far enough away, then jumped to hyperspace. The moment they entered the stream, the shimmer around the ship vanished. The three sisters collapsed. David was out of his chair immediately, checking on them. They were breathing hard but seemed okay. Just exhausted. You did it, he said. You saved us. Violet managed a weak chirp. Amber gave him a tired smile. Ruby just nodded once before closing her eyes. David carried them one by one to the cargo hold where they'd made a nest of blankets. They curled up together, already falling asleep. He stood watching them for a moment. Three younglings who'd been through more than most adults ever faced. Three people who'd chosen to protect him just as he'd chosen to protect them. We're going to make it, he promised them quietly. I'll get you to New Perth, I swear it. He returned to the bridge and checked their position. They'd lost the pursuit for now, but Silas wouldn't give up. The hunt had just begun. David pulled up the navigation charts and started plotting a new course, one that would take them far from any official routes. The wandering star flew on through the darkness between stars, carrying her strange family toward an uncertain future. 2 weeks passed as the wandering star made her way through the frontier regions of space. David avoided all major stations and shipping lanes, stopping only at small outposts for fuel and basic supplies. The sisters stayed hidden during these stops, but they were getting restless. Staying confined to the ship was hard on them, especially Violet, who wanted to explore everything. Ruby had started helping David with navigation. Her understanding of mathematics was impressive, and she could calculate jump coordinates faster than his aging computer. Amber discovered she loved working on the ship's systems. She had a natural talent for engineering that amazed David. Violet appointed herself ship's cook, learning to operate the food synthesizer and surprising them all with her creative combinations. They were becoming a crew, a strange crew, but a crew nonetheless. David found himself looking forward to their conversations, to Ruby's dry humor, Amber's endless questions, and Violet's cheerful songs in a language he didn't understand but found beautiful anyway. New Perth is 6 days away, David announced one evening as they ate dinner together in the galley. Once we get there, we'll contact your aunt. She'll know what to do. Ruby nodded, but something in her expression made David pause. What's wrong? Nothing. Just thinking about what happens after. You've given up your business, your reputation, everything to help us. We can never repay that. I told you I don't want payment. Not payment, Ruby said, but you deserve to know the truth. Our aunt might not be able to help you. You'll be a fugitive for helping us. Station security will have warrants out. You might never be able to work legitimate cargo routes again. David had thought about this, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real. His life as he knew it was over. The wandering star was all he had, and even she was barely holding together. What would he do after the sisters were safe? "I'll figure something out," he said with more confidence than he felt. "Maybe I'll run medical supplies to colonies that can't afford proper shipping. Or join one of the independent freight collectives. There's always work out here for someone willing to take it." Violet reached over and took his hand. Her claws were gentle against his skin. "You could stay with us. Our aunt would welcome you. You're family now." The word hit David harder than he expected. Family. He hadn't had family since his parents died when he was young. The merchant fleet had been the closest thing, and he'd left that behind. He'd been alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. "Maybe," he said softly. "Let's get there first." They were 4 days out from New Perth when disaster struck. David was sleeping when the proximity alarm woke him. He stumbled to the bridge in time to see 6 ships dropping out of hyperspace around them. Not just any ships. Military-grade warships with House Crimson insignias. "No," he breathed. "How did they find us?" Ruby appeared behind him, already awake. Her eyes went wide with recognition. "They tracked us. They must have put a tracer on the ship somehow." David's mind raced. When could that have happened? Then he remembered. Trinity Station, when the woman's men had been on his ship. They must have planted a tracking device during the inspection. He'd been so focused on hiding the sisters that he'd never thought to sweep for trackers. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have checked." "No time for that now," Ruby said. She called for her sisters. Amber and Violet arrived quickly, both scared but ready. The communications panel lit up. Silas's face appeared, looking triumphant. "End of the line, Captain Reed. You've led us on quite a chase. But it's over now. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. The princesses will return to Ashir for proper judgment. He'll stand trial for kidnapping, smuggling, and obstruction of justice." "We know the truth," David said. "Their stepmother tried to poison them. You're taking them back to die." "What happens on Ashir is Ashir business," Silas replied coldly. "You're human. This doesn't concern you. Hand them over and you might avoid a death sentence. Refuse and we'll destroy your ship and recover what's left." The connection cut off. David looked at his console. They were surrounded. No asteroid field to hide in this time. No clever tricks left. The Wandering Star's shields wouldn't last a minute against military-grade weapons. "What do we do?" Amber asked, her voice shaking. David's hands moved across the controls, calculating. There was one option. Barely an option, but it was something. There was a nearby trading outpost, Port Haven, just inside sensor range. If he could get a distress signal there. If station security responded fast enough, they might survive long enough to be arrested instead of killed. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. "I'm going to make a run for Port Haven," he said. "It's our only chance." Ruby was quiet for a moment. Then she moved to stand directly in front of David. "No, there's another way." "Ruby, what are you—" "Listen to me. This ends now, one way or another. They won't stop hunting us. They'll chase us forever, putting everyone we meet in danger. I won't let that happen anymore. I won't let you die for us." What are you saying?" Ruby looked at her sisters. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Amber's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Violet made a small sound of distress, but also nodded. "We surrender," Ruby said. "But only us. You take the escape pod and go to Port Haven. Claim we hijacked your ship, forced you to help us. They'll believe it. You'll be free." "Absolutely not," David said. "I'm not abandoning you. You're not. You're surviving. Someone needs to tell our story. Someone needs to make sure the truth gets out about what happened to us." Ruby's voice was steady, but her eyes were desperate. "Please, David. You've given us 2 months of freedom we never would have had. You've shown us that not everyone in the universe is cruel. That's enough. Let us give you this." Amber stepped forward. "She's right. If you die here, our story dies too. But if you live, you can tell people what happened. Maybe it won't change anything, but maybe it will." Violet was crying now, but she came to David and pressed her head against his chest one last time. "Thank you for being kind. Thank you for the food and the blankets and the scratches between my horns. Thank you for making me feel safe." David felt his own eyes burning. This wasn't right. They were children. He was supposed to protect them, not let them sacrifice themselves for him. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. "There isn't." Ruby said gently. You know there isn't, and we're out of time. She was right. The warships were closing in, weapons charging. In seconds, they would open fire. David looked at the three sisters who had somehow become the most important people in his life in just 2 weeks. I'll tell everyone, he promised. I'll make sure they know what you did, what was done to you. I swear it, Ruby nodded. That's all we ask. She moved to the communications panel and opened a channel to the warships. This is Ruby of House Crimson. My sisters and I surrender unconditionally. The human captain is innocent. He was our prisoner. Let him go and we'll come peacefully. Silas's voice came back suspicious. How do we know this isn't a trick? Because I'm done running, Ruby said simply. I'm tired, Silas, we all are. Just let the human go. He has nothing to do with this. There was a long pause. Then, very well. Captain Reed, take your escape pod to Port Haven. Make any attempt to interfere and we destroy you both. Princesses, prepare for transport. Ruby turned to David. Go now, before they change their minds. David wanted to argue, to fight, to do something. But Amber was already guiding him toward the escape pod bay. Violet pressed something into his hand. The pouch of gems they'd been saving. Ruby sealed the bridge door behind them, locking herself inside. Ruby, David called. Open the door. Goodbye, David, Ruby's voice came through the intercom. Thank you for everything. Amber pushed him into the escape pod. Violet jumped in after him. Before David could react, Amber sealed the door from the outside. No. Amber, what are you doing? Through the small window, he saw Amber's golden scales glowing. Violet stays with you. She's too young. She deserves a chance to grow up free. Tell her we love her. Tell her we're proud of her. Amber. But the pod was already launching. David grabbed Violet as the acceleration threw them back. Through the window, he watched the wandering star grow smaller. He saw a boarding craft attached to his ship's hull. Saw Ruby and Amber being taken aboard the warships. Violet was screaming, her claws tearing at the pod's walls, trying to get back to her sisters. David held her tight, his own tears falling as the warships turned and jumped to hyperspace, taking Ruby and Amber with them. The pod's autopilot was already taking them toward Port Haven. There was nothing David could do but hold Violet as she cried and watch the empty space where his ship had been. The wandering star was gone. Ruby and Amber were gone. Everything was gone except Violet, and the promise he'd made, and the truth that needed to be told. David held the small dragon close and made a new promise in the darkness. He would tell their story. He would expose what House Crimson had done, and somehow, someway, he would get Ruby and Amber back. The escape pod drifted toward Port Haven, while in the distance the stars shone cold and indifferent. Port Haven security picked up the escape pod within hours. David told them exactly what Ruby had instructed him to say. The dragons had hijacked his ship, forced him to help them, then surrendered when cornered. The security officers didn't quite believe him, but they had no evidence to prove otherwise. Without his ship and without witnesses, there was nothing to charge him with. They let him go with a warning to be more careful about his cargo inspections. Violet stayed hidden in a storage container David had smuggled aboard the pod. The moment they were clear of the station's main security areas, he found a cheap hotel room in the lower levels where nobody asked questions. Only then did he let Violet out. She hadn't spoken since watching her sisters taken away. She just curled into a tight ball in the corner of the room, her scales dull and lifeless. David sat with her, not knowing what to say. What comfort could he offer? Her sisters had sacrificed themselves to save her. No words could make that better. We're going to get them back, David said finally. I don't know how yet, but we will. I promise. Violet looked at him with those violet eyes now filled with such sadness that David's heart broke. How we have no ship, no money except what they gave us. No way to even reach Ashir. Then we find help. Your aunt in New Perth, maybe she has resources, connections. Or we find someone else who cares about the truth. Nobody cares, Violet said bitterly. Ruby and Amber knew that. That's why they surrendered. They knew even if we ran forever, eventually we'd be caught. And when we were, you would die trying to protect us. They chose to end it their way. David stood up. No, I don't accept that. Your sisters gave us a chance. They bought us time. We're not going to waste it by giving up. He pulled out the pouch of gems Violet had given him. There was enough here to buy passage to New Perth, maybe even hire some help. But first he needed information. He needed to know what had happened to Ruby and Amber, where they'd been taken, what their stepmother planned to do with them. Over the next 3 days, David used the hotel's public terminal to research everything he could about House Crimson and Asher politics. What he found made him sick. The civil war between the houses was worse than the news had reported. Assassination, betrayal, and power plays were common. Ruby's stepmother, Lady Iris of House Gold, had consolidated enormous power since marrying Ruby's father. Several of her political enemies had died in convenient accidents. But David also found something else. A small human news outlet called Frontier Truth that specialized in exposing corruption in the outer colonies. They'd done several pieces on Asher politics, questioning the official stories. If anyone would care about Ruby and Amber's story, it would be them. David recorded everything. The whole story from finding the sisters in his cargo hold to watching them taken by House Crimson's warships. He sent it to Frontier Truth with all the evidence he had, including images of Violet to prove at least one of the sisters was still free. The response came back within hours. A journalist named Patricia Lee wanted to meet in person. She had questions and resources that might help. They met in a quiet cafe in Port Haven's Market District. Patricia was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with the look of someone who'd seen too much but refused to stop looking. "Your story matches other reports I've received," she said after David finished explaining everything. "Lady Iris has been cleaning house, eliminating anyone with a claim to House Crimson's leadership. Ruby and her sisters were just the latest targets. Can you help them?" David asked. "I can expose what she's doing. My network reaches millions of people across human space. Public pressure might force the Asher government to investigate. But I won't lie to you, Captain Reed, it's a long shot. Asher politics are complicated and humans have limited influence there. What about going there directly?" "Trying to rescue them?" Patricia shook her head. "House Crimson's compound is a fortress. Security is military grade. Even if you somehow got inside, you'd never get out alive, and you'd be starting an interstellar incident that could destroy human-Asher relations." David felt frustration burning in his chest. There had to be something they could do besides write news articles and hope for the best. Violet, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke up. The day of voices. Both David and Patricia looked at her. Violet's scales had regained some of their color as she sat up straighter. The Day of Voices is an Asher tradition. Once a year, any citizen can petition the High Council directly. No interference, no gatekeepers. Even children from ruling houses. If Ruby and Amber could speak before the council, if they could tell their story publicly where Lady Iris couldn't silence them, the truth would come out. "When is this Day of Voices?" Patricia asked, suddenly interested. 6 weeks from now," Violet said, "but they'd have to be at the council hall in the capital city. And Lady Iris will never let them anywhere near it. She'll keep them locked away until she can arrange a proper accident." David was thinking fast. What if we could get them there? If Patricia publishes the story now, it'll put pressure on Lady Iris. She'll have to be careful, watch her actions more closely. That might give us an opening. "Getting them to the council hall would require inside help," Patricia said. "Someone within House Crimson who could move them without Lady Iris knowing." "Their father," Violet said quietly. "Lord Marcus. He loved Ruby's mother. He loves his daughters. He just doesn't know the truth about Lady Iris. If we could reach him, if we could make him understand." Patricia nodded slowly. "I have contacts in the Asher diplomatic service. People who owe me favors. I might be able to get a message through to Lord Marcus. But it would have to be convincing. He'd need proof that Lady Iris tried to poison his daughters." "I can tell him," Violet said. "I was there. I saw it happen. I can give him details that only someone who lived through it would know." Over the next week, they worked together to build their case. Patricia's contacts managed to get a coded message through to Lord Marcus. Violet recorded a detailed testimony, providing specific dates, locations, and names that could be verified. David added his account of finding the sisters and everything that happened after. The response came back cryptically. Lord Marcus wanted to believe them, but needed time to investigate Lady Iris's actions secretly. He promised to be ready when the Day of Voices arrived. If Ruby and Amber could survive until then, he would ensure they made it to the council hall. Patricia published her story. It spread across human space and eventually reached Asher. Public pressure mounted. Human diplomats asked pointed questions about the treatment of the young princesses. Lady Iris found herself under scrutiny she couldn't easily dismiss. But 6 weeks was a long time. David used the gems to buy equipment, weapons, anything that might be useful. He hired a small ship, nothing like the Wandering Star but fast enough. Patricia introduced him to others who wanted to help, people who had their own reasons to oppose House Gold's growing power. Violet trained with David, learning to fight, to fly ships, to be ready for whatever came next. She was growing, David noticed. Not just physically, but in confidence. The scared child who had hidden in his cargo hold was becoming someone stronger. They wouldn't want you to risk your life for them, Violet said one evening as they prepared. Probably not, David agreed. But they risked theirs for me. For us. I'm not abandoning them. Neither are you. The day of voices finally arrived. David, Violet, and a small team of Patricia's most trusted contacts infiltrated Ashir using forged diplomatic credentials. The plan was desperate and probably suicidal. They would break into House Crimson's compound, free Ruby and Amber, and get them to the council hall before Lady Iris could stop them. Everything went wrong immediately. The compound's security was tighter than expected. 2 of their team were captured in the first hour. David and Violet barely made it inside using ventilation shafts, just like Ruby had done weeks before on the Wandering Star. They found the cell where the sisters were being held. Ruby and Amber looked terrible. Thin, beaten, their scales cracked and dull, but when they saw Violet and David, their eyes lit up with something David recognized. Hope. You idiots came back for us, Ruby said, her voice rough but carrying a hint of her old humor. Of course we did, David said as he worked on the electronic lock. Your family. The lock clicked open. The sisters embraced Violet, all 3 crying and making that harmonic purring sound. David watched the reunion for just a moment before the alarm started blaring. We have to move. Now! They ran through the compound's corridors. Lady Iris's security forces were everywhere, cutting off escape routes. David fired his weapon, providing cover as the sisters moved. They were weak from imprisonment but fighting with everything they had. A blast hit David in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard. Ruby tried to turn back, but he shouted at her, "Keep going. Get to the council hall. Tell them everything." Then Violet was there, helping him up. Amber was fighting off 3 guards at once. Ruby turned back toward them just as Lord Marcus himself appeared, flanked by his own loyal guards. "Daughters," he said, and his voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have seen what she was doing." Lady Iris appeared at the far end of the corridor, her face twisted with rage. "Marcus, stop this madness. Those creatures are lying. I've only ever tried to help them." "I found the poison in your chambers," Lord Marcus said coldly. "The same compound that nearly killed my daughters. And I found the payments you made to bounty hunters, the orders to have them killed if they couldn't be captured quietly." He looked at his daughters. "I failed you, but I won't fail you now. The council is waiting. Go. Tell them everything." With Lord Marcus's protection, they made it to the council hall. The session was already in progress. The plaza filled with thousands of Ashir citizens and human observers. Patricia had ensured maximum media coverage. Whatever happened next would be seen across 2 civilizations. Ruby, Amber, and Violet stood before the High Council. And they told their story, every detail, every moment of terror and pain and desperate flight. Ruby's voice was clear and strong. Amber provided evidence they had hidden before escaping. Violet testified about what she had witnessed. Lady Iris tried to interrupt, tried to discredit them. But Lord Marcus stood with his daughters. Patricia's evidence was presented. Human witnesses testified. The truth came out in a flood that couldn't be stopped or denied. The council deliberated for 3 hours. When they emerged, their judgment was final. Lady Iris was stripped of all titles and sentenced to exile. Her co-conspirators were arrested. Ruby, Amber, and Violet were officially recognized as the legitimate heirs of House Crimson, with full rights and protections restored. It was over. They had won. David watched from the crowd as the 3 sisters were reunited with their father, as justice was finally served. His shoulder burned from the blast wound, but he was smiling. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd saved each other. Ruby found him after the ceremony. Amber and Violet were with her, all 3 looking exhausted but happy. "You came back for us," Ruby said. "You didn't have to. You could have been safe on New Perth." "I promised I'd get you back," David said. "I keep my promises," Ruby smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile. "We have an offer for you. House Crimson needs a new fleet captain, Someone we trust absolutely. Someone who has already proven his loyalty and courage. The position comes with a ship. A good ship, not like your old freighter. Though we could name it Wandering Star if you wanted. David looked at the three sisters he'd found starving in his cargo hold weeks ago. The three people who had become his family. The thought of leaving them now felt impossible. Will there be snacks? Violet asked hopefully. Because the new ship should definitely have better snacks. David laughed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Then I accept, he said. Captain of House Crimson's fleet. But the ship is definitely called Wandering Star too. And yes, Violet, lots of snacks. The sisters surrounded him in a group embrace, their scales warm and their purring filling the air. David closed his eyes and held on to his strange, wonderful family. They had survived. Together. And whatever came next, they would face it the same way.